The neighborhood looked calm from the outside. Clean streets, trimmed lawns, and houses that all seemed to follow the same quiet pattern. People waved politely but rarely stopped to talk. Most residents believed this place was peaceful because everyone followed the rules. Those rules were controlled by the HOA, group that claimed to exist to protect property values and order. The homeowner had lived there for several years without trouble. Life followed a simple routine. Mornings were for work, evenings for rest, and weekends for small tasks around the house. Nothing loud. Nothing flashy. Just a normal life. The HOA had always been in the background, sending the occasional newsletter or reminder about trash days or lawn care. It never felt personal. That changed one afternoon when a letter appeared in the mailbox at first glance. It looked like any other HOA notice. Plain envelope. Official tone. The homeowner opened it without worry. But as the words were read, a tight feeling formed in the chest. The letter claimed there was a violation. It did not explain much. Just a short message saying a rule had been broken and action was required within 7 days to avoid further steps. The homeowner read it twice, then a third time. Nothing in the letter clearly explained what was wrong. It mentioned a section of the rules, but did not describe the problem. There was no photo, no date, no clear detail. Just a warning. Confused but calm, the homeowner walked outside and looked around the property. The lawn was neat. The driveway was clear. Nothing seemed out of place. The house looked the same as it always had. Neighbors' homes looked similar, some even less maintained. Yet there was no sign they had received the same letter. That night, the homeowner sat at the kitchen table and pulled out the HOA rule booklet. It was thick and filled with small print. After reading the section mentioned in the letter, the homeowner still could not find anything that matched the warning. It felt vague, almost intentionally unclear. The next morning, the homeowner decided to respond politely. An email was sent asking for clarification. The message was respectful and simple. It asked what the issue was and how it could be fixed. No response came that day. 2 days passed, then 3. On the 4th day, another letter arrived. This one felt different. The tone was sharper. It stated that failure to correct the issue would result in fines. The amount was listed clearly. The problem still was not. The letter ended with a line saying further action could be taken. If compliance was not met, the homeowner felt a mix of frustration and disbelief. It no longer felt like a mistake. It felt like pressure. A second email was sent, again calm, again respectful. This time the homeowner asked directly for proof of the violation. A photo, a description, anything. The email also mentioned that no response had been received to the earlier message. Later that evening, while taking out the trash, the homeowner noticed something unusual. A car was parked down the street longer than normal. Inside were 2 people, watching. When eye contact was made, one of them quickly looked away. The car drove off a few minutes later. At first, the homeowner tried to brush it off. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe someone was visiting a neighbor. Still, the timing felt strange. Over the next few days, small things began to add up. Another slow drive-by. A board member standing at the corner, pretending to check a phone, while clearly looking toward the house. None of it was direct, but all of it felt intentional. Neighbors noticed too. One quietly asked if everything was okay. When the homeowner mentioned the letters, the neighbors sighed and lowered their voice. They said something similar had happened to them once. It ended only after they paid a fine. They never fully understood that conversation stuck in the homeowner's mind. By the end of the week, still no response had come from the HOA emails. Instead, a final notice arrived. This one stated that the violation was still unresolved and that fines would begin immediately. It also warned that continued failure could lead to further enforcement actions. The homeowner sat in silence after reading it. Fear tried to creep in. Thoughts of legal trouble, costs, and stress started circling. The HOA had power. Everyone knew that. Most people didn't fight back. They complied, paid, and moved on. That was how things worked here. But something about this felt wrong. The homeowner walked through the house slowly, noticing the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the light coming through the windows, the small signs of a life built over years. This was home, and the idea of being bullied out of peace by vague threats did not sit right, instead of reacting emotionally. The homeowner made a decision. If the HOA wanted to intimidate, the response would not be panic. It would be patience. That night, every letter was laid out on the table. Dates were noted. Words were highlighted. The rulebook was opened again, this time more carefully. Each sentence was read with focus. The homeowner began taking notes, writing down questions, marking unclear sections, and noticing contradictions. Something became clear. The HOA was using fear, not facts. The next step was simple, but powerful. The homeowner started documenting everything. Photos of the property were taken from every angle. Timestamps were saved. Emails were archived. Even the drive-bys were written down with dates and times. What started as confusion slowly turned into determination. The HOA may have expected silence. They may have expected quick payment. They may have expected compliance without question. Instead, they had awakened someone who was no longer willing to be scared. And this was only the beginning. The days that followed felt heavier. The homeowner woke up each morning with a knot in the stomach, not from fear, but from the sense that something unseen had changed in the neighborhood. The letters, once rare, began to feel like they could come at any moment. Each time the mail was opened, the heart beat faster, not because of surprise, but because it had become a small ritual of stress. The HOA seemed to be watching, and even small actions felt like they were under scrutiny at first. The homeowner tried to carry on as normal. Work, chores, small moments of relaxation. But subtle signs began appearing that could not be ignored. A new letter left on the doorstep with no envelope, its words underlined in red. A notice taped to the mailbox with a date that had already passed. Even a neighbor who had once been friendly began to offer curious glances. Something had shifted in the quiet rhythm of the street, determined not to let intimidation take control. The homeowner focused on preparation. Every email sent was meticulously written. Every phone call logged. Notes were taken during every interaction. It was no longer just about the letters. It was about understanding exactly what the HOA was trying to do and why. The more the homeowner read through the rulebook, the more gaps and contradictions became visible. Sections cited in letters often didn't match the alleged violations. Some rules seemed outdated or unenforceable, yet they were being used to justify threats. One afternoon, a board member appeared in person at the house. The homeowner had seen this person before during community meetings, but never as a direct visitor. This time, the knock was deliberate, the timing suspicious. The homeowner opened the door calmly. The board member smiled, but spoke in a tone that felt cold, rehearsed. They mentioned the violation again, this time verbally, and repeated the fine that had been listed in the letters. Every word felt designed to unsettle, every pause intentional. But the homeowner listened carefully, asked questions, and refused to react with anger. Politeness became a shield. After the board member left, the homeowner documented the visit in detail. Times, words, gestures, even the tone of voice. It all went into a growing folder of evidence. It was not just letters or emails now. It was interactions. Patterns were beginning to emerge. This was not a one-time error or misunderstanding. It was pressure, systematic and deliberate. Neighbors began to notice the homeowner's cautious diligence. Some were curious, others wary. One older resident who had lived in the neighborhood for decades offered quiet advice. "They like quiet people who do what they are told," the neighbor said. "If you make them uncomfortable, they get frustrated, and that is when mistakes happen." The homeowner nodded but kept that thought private. It was both encouraging and frightening. Encouraging because it suggested there was a way to fight back. Frightening because it confirmed how much power the HOA held. Emails continued to be ignored, but the homeowner found ways to stay informed. Meeting minutes from past board sessions were requested. Publicly accessible documents were studied. Each detail became a piece of the puzzle. The homeowner started to notice inconsistencies, dates that did not match, previous complaints that had been dismissed, rules that were enforced selectively. It painted a picture of bias, of uneven enforcement, and of an organization more interested in control than fairness. Despite the tension, the homeowner continued life outside the conflict. Mornings were for walks, evenings for reading, or simple chores. But the shadow of the HOA loomed over every task. Even a new plant in the garden felt like it might become a violation. Every action became cautious, and yet the homeowner refused to act out of fear. There was a conscious effort to live normally while gathering knowledge, like building an invisible armor against intimidation. A turning point arrived one weekend when an HOA letter was left at the doorstep with a fine attached and a threat of further action. If compliance was not immediate, what was striking was how generic it felt, almost mechanical. It seemed that the board had prepared the letter in advance with no personal review of the actual situation. The homeowner realized that this was not personal, even though it felt invasive. It was the system operating without accountability instead of responding with panic. The homeowner drafted a calm but firm letter. Every claim from the HOA was addressed point by point. Each statement of violation was countered with facts, dates, and photos. The letter concluded politely but clearly. Proof of the violation was requested, along with a detailed explanation of the steps necessary to resolve the matter. There was no emotion, no anger, no begging, just facts. Neighbors began to notice that something was changing. Some started asking quietly about how the homeowner handled the situation. Others mentioned past experiences of paying fines without question, never realizing they could challenge them. Word spread slowly. The homeowner's careful, calm approach was building respect. It's not just resistance. Even as tension grew, the homeowner did not act impulsively. The car that had appeared on the street previously was still sometimes seen, but now each observation was documented. A neighbor mentioned seeing the same vehicle the previous week. Connections began forming. The homeowner started to suspect that some board members were personally involved in monitoring, using the guise of neighborhood oversight to apply pressure. Every detail added to a growing realization this was not just about rules. It was about control. The homeowner also found unexpected support online. Community forums, legal advice pages, and local groups offered insight into how similar situations had played out elsewhere. Some stories were frightening, some encouraging, but all emphasized the importance of careful documentation, patience, and a refusal to be bullied into paying for unjust fines. The homeowner's determination strengthened. Knowledge became power, and power reduced fear. Late one evening, after days of careful study and documentation, the homeowner realized something. Fear could no longer be allowed to dominate. Each letter, each visit, each implied threat had been met with calm and careful recording. Now, there was enough information to begin understanding the HOA's methods. Patterns were clear. Letters were automated or generic. Visits were planned for maximum psychological impact. Rules were enforced inconsistently. The homeowner was no longer alone in this understanding. Small victories reinforced confidence. An email requesting clarification received a partial response. A board member gave a vague answer during a meeting that revealed inconsistencies. Each tiny piece of acknowledgement became evidence that the HOA was not infallible, that it could be questioned, that it could be held accountable. The week ended with a quiet sense of readiness. The homeowner understood that the fight was not over. But there was a clear plan. Document everything, remain calm, ask questions, and never respond in fear. Every interaction was now a part of the bigger picture. Impatience had become a weapon. Neighbors continued to watch quietly, some curious, some skeptical, some supportive in ways that could not be openly expressed. The homeowner began to understand the power of community and awareness. If others had spoken up earlier, perhaps these patterns of intimidation would have been noticed sooner. Now, with careful steps, the homeowner would show that respect and knowledge could challenge even the most confident attempts at control. By the end of this period, the homeowner had changed. There was less sleep, more vigilance, but also a deepening sense of purpose. The intimidation that once felt overwhelming was no longer entirely frightening. It was now a challenge to be understood, a situation to be navigated, a puzzle to be solved. The homeowner's resolve grew stronger every day, fueled by patience, documentation, and quiet determination. This was not a battle fought with anger or loud protests. It was a test of strategy, persistence, and careful observation. The homeowner now knew the HOA's tactics, understood its limits, and was preparing for the next step. What had started as fear was now turning into control, and slowly, the neighborhood was beginning to notice. The homeowner felt the weight of the situation every time the mail arrived. Each letter from the HOA, each notice, each fine, vague, or sharp was no longer just a stressor. It had become a clue, a piece of a puzzle that needed to be carefully examined. The first weeks had been about learning, about observing, and about resisting the instinct to panic. Now, the homeowner knew it was time to dig deeper, to truly understand what was happening and why. Early one morning, the homeowner sat at the kitchen table with the stack of letters, printed emails, and notes gathered over the past few weeks. The sunlight spilled across the papers, highlighting dates, times, and underlined sentences. Each document was read again. Words that had seemed innocuous before now appeared like parts of a deliberate pattern. Some of the alleged violations were so small they barely made sense. A slightly higher fence post, a bush that extended a few inches beyond the property line, a flower pot in an unusual position. Nothing serious. Yet each one had triggered a letter, a warning, a fine. The homeowner began to see a clear pattern. The HOA targeted minor or subjective issues, and they repeated the same approach regardless of facts. Curiosity drove the next step. The homeowner started requesting official documents from past HOA meetings, public records, past board meeting minutes, and notices sent to other residents. Each request was written carefully, politely, but firmly. The homeowner wanted proof of consistency in how rules were applied. The goal was not confrontation, but understanding. Why were some residents allowed certain exceptions while others faced fines? The response was slower than expected, but the information eventually started arriving. Going through these records was eye-opening. There were letters, fines, and warnings sent to other homeowners that seemed equally vague, but some were ignored, some were corrected quickly without penalty. Some letters seemed to vanish, or no follow-up was recorded. It became clear enforcement was inconsistent. Some rules were selectively applied. Some fines seemed designed to create stress rather than resolve issues. The homeowner started building a list, noting contradictions, cross-referencing dates and actions. Neighbors became an unexpected source of information. One by one, the homeowner approached people quietly. Some were hesitant to talk. Fear of retaliation still lingered in the neighborhood. Others had stories that matched the homeowner's experience. Letters sent without explanation, visits from board members that felt intimidating, fines for minor infractions. Each story reinforced the idea that this was not personal. It was systemic. The HOA had a way of applying pressure that relied on fear more than fairness. And the more the homeowner listened, the more a plan began to form. It wasn't easy. Each step required patience. Some neighbors admitted they had ignored their own warnings, quietly paying fines or making small changes, hoping the letters would stop. The homeowner realized that fear kept most people silent. That fear was the HOA's real power. But for those willing to question, to document, and to stand firm, there was a chance to push back, and the homeowner was ready to take that chance. Next, the homeowner began mapping every interaction with the HOA: letters, emails, phone calls, visits, dates, times, wording, tone. Even the smallest detail was noted. Each item became a piece of evidence. Photographs of the property, including small areas that had been mentioned in letters, were carefully taken, time-stamped and dated. Nothing could be left to memory. Everything had to be documented. It was meticulous work, and at times exhausting, but every piece of information added strength. Knowledge, the homeowner realized, was a form of power. The homeowner also began reviewing the HOA rules more critically. Some sections were vague, open to interpretation. Others seemed outdated, written decades ago when the neighborhood was different. Many of the cited rules were not clear in the first place. The homeowner highlighted the language, comparing it with other parts of the document, noting where contradictions existed. Each note, each highlight, each question created a roadmap for understanding exactly where the HOA overstepped its authority. One morning, a neighbor stopped by quietly. They whispered about a previous homeowner who had been fined for a trivial issue and had eventually left the neighborhood out of frustration. "They like to push until people break," the neighbor said. The homeowner nodded, understanding more clearly than ever that the challenge was psychological as well as procedural. Remaining calm, precise, and documented was no longer optional. It was essential. Even the homeowner's daily routines became part of the preparation. Walks, yard work, and small repairs were now carefully planned, photographed, and logged. Each action, even those that seemed normal, became a way to show compliance and build a record. The homeowner knew that the next time the HOA tried to intimidate, there would be clear, documented evidence to respond. Then came another visit from a board member. This time, the homeowner was ready. Calm and composed, every question was answered factually. Every allegation was met with evidence, photographs, dates, and written notes. The board members seemed unprepared for this approach. They left without further threat, but the homeowner knew it was temporary. The system was designed to intimidate, and the homeowner had disrupted its rhythm. That small victory, though quiet, was meaningful. Emails continued to be sent, carefully written, asking for clarification, evidence, and official explanations. Each response, or lack thereof, was documented. Slowly, the homeowner began to realize the broader pattern. The HOA relied on fear, confusion, and silence. By removing the fear and replacing it with facts, the homeowner had taken the first step toward dismantling their power. It was subtle, but it worked. Confidence began to grow. At the same time, the homeowner reached out to legal resources and local community groups online. Stories of similar situations revealed common threads: vague letters, selective enforcement, intimidation tactics, fear of fines, and quiet compliance from most residents. Every story reinforced one lesson: persistence, documentation, and calm communication were the keys to surviving and winning. The homeowner began to draft a careful plan. Continue documenting, continue gathering evidence, continue seeking clarity, and remain patient. Even with this plan, the stress was real. Nights were sometimes restless, mornings occasionally heavy with anxiety. But the homeowner recognized the difference between fear and preparation. Fear paralyzed, preparation empowered. Each day, each careful action, each photograph, each note, each polite but firm email built strength. The homeowner was no longer reacting blindly. Each step was strategic, each response deliberate. Neighbors began to take notice more openly. Some approached, quietly, to ask advice. Others nodded with quiet respect. Even those who were afraid of confrontation began to see that standing up did not immediately result in punishment. Change was possible when met with knowledge and calm resolve. The homeowner's careful documentation and measured actions were becoming a quiet example. The turning point in this stage came when the homeowner noticed a small inconsistency in the HOA's previous letters. One fine was dated incorrectly. One alleged violation had already been addressed weeks earlier. The homeowner highlighted these points, adding them to the growing list of contradictions. Suddenly, the letters that had seemed threatening now appeared flawed. The intimidation was losing its grip, one detail at a time. By the end of this period, the homeowner felt a shift. Fear still existed, as it always would in tense situations, but it no longer dictated action. Each day was now a calculated step toward understanding, toward clarity, toward accountability. The homeowner's focus was clear: document everything, remain calm, analyze patterns, and gather evidence. Knowledge had become power. Confidence had begun to replace anxiety, and slowly, the neighborhood was starting to see that the rules did not have to mean silent obedience. This was the stage where the homeowner realized something essential. The HOA's intimidation relied on silence, confusion, and fear. By asking questions, recording facts, and remaining calm, the homeowner had begun to unravel that power. It was no longer a battle of emotion, but a battle of clarity, preparation, and observation. Each letter, each visit, each phone call now provided more insight, more evidence, more opportunity, at last. The homeowner understood the truth of the situation. Intimidation only works when it is accepted. By refusing to accept fear, by insisting on clarity, by carefully documenting every interaction, the homeowner had begun to shift the balance. The next steps would be crucial, but the foundation was now strong. Patience, observation, and careful planning were the homeowner's tools. Knowledge had replaced fear, and determination had begun to shine. The tension had been building for weeks, but now the homeowner felt ready. What had once been fear now felt like focus. The careful documentation, the recorded emails, the photographs, the notes, and the research had created a solid foundation. Each letter, each visit, each phone call had been analyzed, cross-checked, and stored. Every minor detail had become a weapon against the intimidation that had felt so overwhelming at first. And now the homeowner knew it was time to act. The first step was to respond, not with emotion, but with clarity and precision. A carefully written letter was prepared. Every allegation from the HOA was addressed point by point. Each claim of violation was met with dates, photographs, and references to the rulebook that contradicted or clarified the supposed issue. The tone was calm, polite, and professional. There was no accusation, no anger, and no fear. The goal was simple: to demand evidence, to request clarification, and to make it clear that vague threats would no longer intimidate. After sending the letter, the homeowner waited. It was a careful, measured wait. Days passed, and the silence from the HOA was telling. The homeowner knew they had disrupted the pattern, that the usual method of intimidation, vague letters, threats of fines, subtle surveillance, had been weakened by facts and calm defiance. Every day, the homeowner continued to photograph the property, log activities, and update the folder of documentation. This was not just preparation. It was a demonstration that nothing would be done in haste or without record. The neighborhood began to notice a change as well. Some residents, who had once quietly accepted fines and threats, started asking questions. The homeowner shared small insights with careful discretion, revealing how documentation and calm, factual responses could change the situation. These neighbors began to see the power of preparation, patience, and observation. Fear was no longer invisible. It could be confronted, recorded, and challenged. Then, the first response from the HOA arrived. It was brief, defensive, and vague, but it revealed cracks in their approach. Some points were addressed incorrectly, dates were misstated, and explanations were incomplete. The homeowner carefully noted every error, every inconsistency. The realization was clear. The intimidation tactics relied on speed, confusion, and silence. When challenged with facts, they faltered. Confidence began to grow. With this newfound leverage, the homeowner requested a formal meeting with the HOA board. The request was polite but firm, emphasizing the need to review the alleged violations and provide clarity for compliance. The board, perhaps surprised by the homeowner's composed approach, agreed to the meeting. The homeowner prepared meticulously. Each document, each photograph, each note was organized. Every point of concern from the letters was ready to be presented. The homeowner was not seeking conflict. The goal was accountability and clarity. On the day of the meeting, the tension was palpable. Board members arrived with confident expressions, expecting a homeowner intimidated and apologetic. Instead, they were met with calm, preparedness, and focus. The homeowner began with a clear, concise explanation of the actions taken to address each alleged violation, supported by photographs and documentation. Questions were asked politely, but firmly. Requests for evidence and clarification were made repeatedly. The board's initial reactions varied. Some members seemed flustered, unprepared for such a methodical response. Others attempted to reassert authority through tone and posture, but the homeowner remained composed. Every claim was countered with facts. Every vague threat met with questions. Slowly, the dynamic began to shift. The homeowner was no longer a passive target. They were an informed participant, demanding accountability and clarity. During the meeting, a critical moment occurred. One of the board members cited a rule that was impossible to enforce as written. The homeowner presented the exact text of the rule and highlighted previous inconsistencies in its application. The board member paused, visibly uncomfortable. Another member attempted to redirect the conversation, but the homeowner calmly brought attention back to the facts. It was a subtle but decisive turning point. For the first time, the board's authority was openly questioned in a formal setting. Neighbors, who had quietly observed from nearby, were beginning to see the impact. The homeowner's composed, factual approach was drawing attention. Conversations that had once been whispered now had confidence. Some residents started documenting their own experiences, inspired by the homeowner's methodical approach. Fear was no longer invisible. It was being confronted with preparation and clarity. After the meeting, the homeowner continued to follow up with emails, confirming points discussed and requesting written clarification for unresolved issues. The tone remained calm and professional. Every interaction was recorded, every response carefully analyzed. The HOA, faced with a homeowner who refused to be intimidated, began to backtrack in some areas and provide partial clarifications in others. The intimidation tactics were losing their effectiveness. The next step involved community support. The homeowner, still discreet, began sharing experiences with a few trusted neighbors. Conversations focused on knowledge, preparation, and the importance of documentation. By demonstrating that fear could be managed and challenged, a quiet network began to form. Residents who had once felt powerless started to see a path forward. The homeowner's example was both inspiring and practical. The situation continued to escalate, but now the homeowner controlled the pace. Letters and emails from the HOA were met with organized, factual responses. Visits from board members were documented and addressed professionally. Every action from the homeowner reinforced one clear message: intimidation would no longer succeed when confronted with knowledge and preparation. One particularly tense moment came when a new fine was issued for a minor alleged violation. The homeowner, now fully confident in the documentation, responded immediately with evidence that the issue had been addressed weeks earlier. The HOA was forced to retract the fine. The sense of victory was quiet but profound. It demonstrated that methodical preparation and calm confrontation could turn fear into leverage. Over the following weeks, the homeowner noticed subtle changes in the HOA's behavior. Letters became less frequent, explanations slightly more detailed, and threats more cautious. The power dynamic was shifting. By refusing to accept vague threats and insisting on accountability, the homeowner had disrupted the usual method of control. At home, life slowly returned to a calmer rhythm. Daily routines continued, but now with an added sense of empowerment. The homeowner's careful approach had not only protected the property and finances, but it also set an example for neighbors. The street, once quiet and tense, now had residents quietly observing and questioning. Change was happening, even if subtly. By the end of this period, the homeowner understood something essential. Intimidation relies on fear, confusion, and silence. By staying calm, documenting everything, asking for evidence, and remaining professional, the homeowner had shifted the balance of power. The HOA's threats, once overwhelming, now seemed vulnerable to scrutiny and challenge. This stage was about more than just standing up for personal rights. It was about demonstrating that systems built on fear could be questioned and held accountable. Preparation, clarity, and calm assertiveness had turned the tables. The homeowner had moved from passive target to informed, confident participant, capable of navigating even the most deliberate attempts at intimidation. The transformation was not complete, but the direction was clear. Fear had been replaced by knowledge. Panic had been replaced by preparation. Silence had been replaced by clarity. The homeowner's quiet, methodical approach had begun to change the neighborhood's understanding of authority, power, and accountability. The next stage would show that when truth, patience, and careful documentation are combined, even the most confident attempts at control can falter. The homeowner was ready. The final confrontation was approaching, and the impact of standing firm and speaking clearly was about to become evident not only to the HOA, but to the entire community. The days that followed the meeting were quiet, but the quiet was different now. It no longer carried tension or dread. Instead, it felt like anticipation. The homeowner had prepared for this moment for weeks, months even. Every letter, every fine, every visit from the board member, every vague threat had been documented, analyzed, and cross-referenced. The homeowner knew exactly how to respond to the next move, and more importantly, had built the confidence to do so calmly, clearly, and effectively. It began with another letter from the HOA, attempting to assert authority over a minor issue. The homeowner read it carefully, taking note of dates, wording, and tone. A photograph had already been taken of the area in question weeks before. An email sent days earlier requesting clarification had gone unanswered. This time, the homeowner was ready. A response was drafted immediately. Every point in the letter was addressed with evidence. Every alleged violation countered with fact. There was no emotion, no anger, no begging, just clarity and documentation. The response was sent, and the homeowner waited. The HOA's reaction was slower than usual. Days passed with no response, which was unusual for them. The homeowner could sense a shift. They had disrupted the usual rhythm of intimidation. Letters, threats, and vague fines were intended to provoke a quick, emotional response. But when met with calm and facts, the board appeared unsettled. The homeowner felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that the balance of power was beginning to tilt. Neighbors began to notice. Some approached cautiously, whispering about the letters they had received in the past. Many admitted that they had quietly complied with fines or threats, believing that resistance was pointless. The homeowner shared small insights, emphasizing the importance of documentation and calm, factual responses. The reaction was subtle but powerful. Other residents began keeping records, taking photographs, and noting dates. Fear had been replaced, in part, by awareness. The next meeting with the board was scheduled, this time with more residents in attendance. The homeowner arrived, prepared, folder in hand, every document organized, every point clear. The board seemed tense. They had expected compliance, a nervous homeowner who would apologize and quietly pay the fines. Instead, they faced someone informed, organized, and calm. Every alleged violation was addressed with evidence. Every question about the process was answered with logic. The dynamic had shifted entirely. During the meeting, a heated moment occurred. One of the board members attempted to assert authority by citing rules that had been misapplied. The homeowner calmly presented the exact rulebook language, now referencing previous inconsistencies and the selective enforcement that had been observed. The board member faltered, unable to respond effectively. Another member tried to regain control by raising their voice, but the homeowner maintained composure, refusing to be distracted by intimidation tactics. Each fact presented weakened the board's position, and the shift was visible to all in the room. Outside the meeting, neighbors quietly discussed what they had seen. Many were shocked at how methodical and calm the homeowner had been. Some had feared retaliation, while others had doubted that anyone could stand up to the board. But here it was, right in front of them, proof that careful preparation and calm confrontation could change the situation. The neighborhood began to buzz with quiet excitement. The homeowner had not only defended personal rights, but had shown a path for others. In the days following the meeting, the homeowner continued to communicate with the HOA, always professionally and always with documentation. Letters were addressed point by point, emails answered with clarity, and requests for proof or clarification were repeated whenever necessary. The HOA's usual tactics, vague letters, implied threats, selective fines were becoming less effective. The homeowner's calm, factual approach had disrupted the intimidation cycle entirely. One morning, A particularly bold letter arrived, attempting to impose a fine for an alleged violation that had been resolved months earlier. The homeowner calmly responded, attaching photographs, emails, and a detailed timeline. The HOA was forced to retract the fine within days. This quiet victory was significant. It demonstrated that preparation, patience, and clarity could not only neutralize intimidation, but also reverse it. The homeowner also began to notice subtle changes in the board's behavior. Letters became less frequent, explanations slightly more thorough, and threats less immediate. It was clear that the board was adjusting to the new reality. The homeowner would no longer respond to fear. Every interaction now required accountability, evidence, and clarity. The power that had once seemed absolute was now contingent. Neighborhood support grew. Residents began sharing experiences, documenting fines, and keeping notes of letters and visits. Fear was no longer silent. The homeowner had set an example, showing that calm, factual, and prepared responses could change the dynamic entirely. People started to feel empowered, realizing that compliance was not the only option and that intimidation could be challenged successfully. The homeowner's confidence continued to grow. Daily routines, yard work, small repairs, gardening, were now carried out with calm assurance. Every action was carefully documented, photographs taken, and notes updated. Even small details like the placement of a new plant or the alignment of a garden decoration were carefully recorded. Nothing could be questioned without evidence. The homeowner had turned vigilance into a tool, transforming stress into strength. Another HOA meeting came, intended to discuss general community matters. The homeowner attended, again prepared. This time, the board attempted to redirect attention away from the documented violations. The homeowner calmly requested clarification, citing specific instances, dates, and evidence. Other residents quietly observed, many taking notes themselves. The board realized that their usual strategies, intimidation, vague threats, and selective enforcement, were no longer effective. They were being watched, held accountable, challenged. The turning point became undeniable when a formal retraction of previous fines was issued. The HOA acknowledged mistakes, inconsistencies, and misapplied rules. It was the first time the homeowner had received an official admission that some actions were unjustified. The sense of relief was quiet but immense. Months of careful observation, documentation, and calm confrontation had finally resulted in a tangible shift. The intimidation tactics that had seemed so powerful at first were now exposed as flawed and unsustainable. Neighbors quietly celebrated, sharing the news in whispers and private conversations. Some admitted they had never imagined anyone standing up to the HOA successfully. Others began organizing informal discussions about documentation, rights, and accountability. Fear was no longer a barrier. The homeowner had not only defended personal rights, but had sparked a subtle but meaningful change in the community.